good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're from. Hello on Facebook, everyone. Welcome to Race Talk Revolution, where your voice matters. I am Reverend Lane Cobb. I am your host and founder of Race Talk Revolution Incorporated, a nonprofit organization committed to curating loving, inclusive conversations about race and racism in the United States. My co-host today is Mr. A.J. Woodson, editor-in-chief of Black Westchester Magazine and co-host of People Before Politics Radio. Our topic today is Black male mental health. Our speaker is Mr. Damon K. Jones, racial justice activist, holistic health coach, and author of the book, Black Minds Must Matter, The Fight Against Anxiety and Depression Being the Best Version of Ourselves. As always during our broadcast, we ask that you please remain muted. That you please remain muted. I can talk until we get to the Q&A section, at which time we will invite you to activate your camera and unmute so that you can express your questions and comments to our speakers. We also remind you that Race Talk Revolution is a safe and brave space for people of all backgrounds to share ideas and opinions and explore the nuances of racism while together growing our capacity for anti-racist activism. The Race Talk community is committed to practicing radically inclusive love. So even when we do not understand or agree what is being shared, we listen with respect, appreciation, and empathy, because it is our commitment that every person is encouraged, every person is heard and appreciated, because here at Race Talk Revolution, every voice matters. And I will now turn the mic over to A.J. Woodson, who will show a brief film clip and then introduce our speaker for today.
Hello, hello, hello.
Death, depression, divorce, debt, devastation, deadbeat, despair. There is a Black male mental health struggle. I became a therapist in therapy. The unsustainability of Black male trauma, Black male rage, Black male resentment is a real thing, an unsustainable thing. So what's the struggle? 1 in 4 psychologists are Black. And when I say Black, I mean that includes Black men and Black women. According to the American Psychological Association, 4% psychologists worldwide, in this country, are Black. For every 100,000 Black Americans, only 1 Black psychiatrist. 7% of Black men received any form of mental health services in the last couple years. Right? Black youth, particularly Black boys, are introduced with the struggle of mental health at a very early age. It's treated in elementary school by suspensions or special education referrals. What's the Black struggle? That's it. The inadequacy of practitioners who look like Black men, who have a unique experience with mental health. Right? What does that mean for all of us? The current mental health industry does not sustain Black male trauma, Black male rage, Black male resentment, which means we have to look at the factors that are uniquely attributed to Black males in this country. What makes me qualified to talk about Black male mental health?
Oh, pardon me.
You're good.
Can you still hear it?
No, you're good. We're good.
Oh, okay, I still hear it.
Well, then just press the stop button, brother.
Okay, there we go. So let me introduce our guest for the day, Mr. Damon K. Jones. Damon K. Jones is an author, activist, publisher. Mr. Jones is a holistic health practitioner, first aid and mental health practitioner, diet and nutrition advisor, vegan, vegetarian, nutrition life coach, with 33 years career in law enforcement with the Westchester County Department of Corrections. Damon believes Black communities must be safe, sacred, and busy, like every other ethnic community. We must set real priorities for our health, wellness, mental clarity, and Black love within our communities. Damon is my partner and co-founder and the publisher of Black Westchester, and he has authored several books on health and wellness, specifically to inspire Black and brown communities towards self-care, self-love, self-efficacy. Mr. Jones is also the New York State Representative of Blacks in Law Enforcement of America from 2016 to 2010. Mr. Jones serves as the Northeast Region President of the National Black Police Association. He also serves as a national board member for the chair for the National Membership Committee of the National Black Police Association, and has been recognized locally and nationally for his leadership in addressing the need for transparency, accountability, justice, and the need to cure social economic disparities in our community. Damon K. Jones, welcome to Race Talk.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, as our audience just learned, you have 33 years in corrections as a correction officer. What brought you to writing this book? Why this book, and why on Black mental health?
What brought me to write the book on Black mental health, because throughout the pandemic, I suffered from severe depression. And I dealt with it by studying and learning that I was depressed. You know, a lot of people walk around with anxiety and depression, and they just know something's wrong, but they don't know that they're actually going through a stage of depression. So in the process of getting my certificates on health and wellness and vegan and nutrition, it led me into studying how food helps anxiety and depression, and how eating bad food can lead to anxiety and depression. So in that point, I started studying and looking at the signs, and I realized I was reading about myself. So in that process, you know, and then I became a first aid and mental health practitioner, because I thought that, you know, if I could bring myself and recognize what I needed to do for myself, I should be able to try to help other people that are going through anxiety and depression. But then in the process, I started seeing a lot of data that has never been brought forth in the medical arena about the high rate of depression among Black males, and the high rate of suicide among Black males, especially Caribbean men. So, you know, and these are the things that are not talked about. You know, the recent article I wrote, Black men invisible and missing in the national healthcare agenda. We are missing because they do not talk about what we go through. So Black minds must matter. The fight against anxiety and depression, being the best versions of ourselves. But I also said on the cover, it is essential to address anxiety and depression through a Black lens. It's the same thing that the speaker was talking about, because we have a hard time finding Black professionals for counseling or for psychiatrists to understand that the Black experience in America is very different. And so, you know, just being Black, there's anxiety. You know, we talk about, I was talking to a friend last night, and we were talking about just being pulled over by police creates anxiety among Black men. You know, I ride home in my uniform as an added protection, you know, because I'm not a small Black man. So I ride home in my uniform to try to diffuse the situation, you know, with the cop, because 9 times out of 10, it's a white cop pulling me over. And being in law enforcement, I do know what to do when pulled over, but also I want to diffuse it. So I wear my uniform, and even though, you know, the job says don't wear your uniform, you know, outside, no, I get in the car in my uniform because I feel that that is a layer of protection. Because yes, even being in law enforcement, I do have anxiety of being pulled over by police. So living as a Black man, you know, there is a lot of anxiety, depression from a racist country. Let's just be honest, you know, with the policies. So, you know, and that's never talked about. You know, it's never talked about and it's never dealt with. So that was one of the reasons, you know, I wrote the book for young people, young Black people or older Black people to read the book, and how do we become the best versions of ourselves? How do we see the signs in our loved ones, you know, that's going through anxiety and depression, to try to head it off. A lot of the Black community is not taught that because mental health is still taboo. Like they don't even want to talk about it. I was on an interview before, and AJ, you was there when the young lady said she was a hairdresser, and one of her clients thought that her husband was being weak because he wanted to seek counseling. You know, we have to break these broken cultural ideas about mental health in the Black community.
Now, as I expected, and I was sharing with Lane, as I know you've actually answered the next question, and I was just about to bring up the situation about the interview, and you've answered that question as well already. So, you know, I thought it was, I found the clip before we got started, and the part that really stuck out to me was he says how we're introduced to this at a very early age, and it usually results in suspension or what do you say? They don't know how to deal with us. So we face this at an early age. You and I also worked with a group of young kids at Cecil Parker Elementary in Mount Vernon. We did a thing called Boys to Men. And every Friday they would have to dress up in a shirt and a tie, and we introduced them to a lot. And we brought them, with their parents' permission, we gave them, we had them watch the situation that happened to Eric Garner and had them talk about it. And one of the guys was saying what bothered him, and he was a big guy, that Eric Garner, he was big like Eric Garner. And he said that means the cops should see him as a threat. And we saw how at an early age, what we face with mental health, you know, was transpiring through them.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, I actually, you know, it's an article in Black Westchester. Police killings of Black people causes trauma to the mental state of Black America. Like we do not address that. Like we saw it, AJ, with the children and the answers that they gave, and the young black boy who was young, but he was big for his age, and he identified himself with Eric Garner. That could be me. I mean, this young boy said it. That could be me. So state-sanctioned killings, you know, police criminality. I don't call it brutality. I call it criminality. It affects the children that sees it because they're all over social media. It affects the families. that are involved. Many of you guys I know, Kenneth Chamberlain, that we've been childhood friends, and we talk about it all the time. And
well, let me start. For those who are not local, who was Kenneth Chamberlain and what happened? Why is it?
Kenneth Chamberlain Jr. is the son of Kenneth Chamberlain, who was killed by White Plains police in White Plains, New York, after he accidentally set off his life alert. And he refused to allow the police in his house. And they ended up breaking down the door, tasering him, shooting with bean bags, and ultimately kill him. There's a movie, I think you can get it on Hulu and the different channels, called The Killing of Kenneth Chamberlain. And they even made a movie out of it to try to bring awareness, not only to police criminality, but also to mental health, because Mr. Chamberlain did have mental health issues, and how police officers are not properly trained in dealing with mental health. And that's another thing too. Like, we're being policed by a department of a government that is not trained in dealing with mental health. And when Black communities are dealing with mental health and not admitting that we have mental health issues. So a lot of that, it ends up with a lot of people being killed because police are not trained, and we are not being mindful, or we're not being honest that there is a mental health issue in the Black community.
You kind of answered this question already, which was, what are some issues specifically affecting the Black community and Black males in particular? And like the speaker, Dr. Curtis
Jasper.
Dr. Curtis Jasper said, we're talking specifically about Black men. And,
Right.
Like we have the newspaper, Black Westchester, people want to know why it has to be Black Westchester. Can you speak of some of the that specifically affect the Black community, especially Black males, who, when we talk about mental health, sometimes do not get, they get left out of the conversation?
Well, just like the doctor was saying, and ultimately, like Malcolm X said, you live in a community that gets poor education and gets poor assistance, and then with the poor education, you get a poor paying job, and with a poor paying job, you have to live in poor neighborhoods, and these neighborhoods don't have the proper assistance. That in itself creates a stressful condition when you cannot feed your family. And then on top of that, most Black communities are food deserts, right? They hardly get fresh food. So if you're not properly getting fresh food, and you're feeding your kids McDonald's and fast food and Chinese food with all the different bad foods that are in the Black neighborhood, that also plays a role in the mental health. It also plays a role in the kids having ADHD. Young Black men are diagnosed with ADHD, and they fill them with medication from the time that they are 6 years old all the way up to a teenager. So we have to, so all these issues, all these layers, creates a mental health crisis within the Black community that a lot of our pastors are afraid to talk about, and our elected officials are definitely afraid to address.
It is interesting how people who are in some of these helping fields that don't consider themselves mental health practitioners, but such as pastors or such as teachers, don't want to address this. They don't want to necessarily look deeper. They kind of just want to gloss over it and kind of maybe even create some things that don't particularly work. So of course we know that just man up and get over it doesn't work, which I think in the Black community for Black men is a thing, right? And I have a question for you about that.
Right.
And then of course in education, where we're talking about the disciplinary procedures, we know that our Black youth who are experiencing behavior issues or just acting out. I mean, that is a mental health crisis, right? We can talk about adverse childhood experiences as well, right? For what our Black youth have to deal with that would create a situation that they would feel like they needed to act out, and being met with discipline rather than a health intervention. So what do you say is necessary? Like, what is it that you would want to see? And so you could be talking about what would you want to see uh, in organizations that maybe the Black community might trust, because we also have that whole thing about the Black community has a distrust of the medical community for very good reason, right? We don't.
Right.
So what is it about, first of all, are Black men likely to have an idea of themselves, right, that is developed over time, that make them more prone to experience mental health issues or to not recognize or address mental health issues when they arise? And what kind of intervention would you like to see?
I think, we have to break the cultural conditioning, of Black men when it comes to mental health. That's number one, because we are just, men in general are taught to be tough, or taught to suck it up. We go to the barbershops, we're not talking about mental health. We're not talking about being in your right mind. All the other things that really have nothing to do with life is discussed, or toxic Black male masculinity is more discussed than healthy male masculinity in a lot of the barbershops.
So say a little bit about that. So barbershop therapy, what's that about for people?
Well, barbershop therapy is mostly men sitting in a barbershop and talking, well, men stuff. And a lot of times, if you don't have elder men, in those barbershops, it's a reflection of the cultural conditioning of social media, of what we see on TV, what a man is disrespecting women, what is reflecting in our entertainment industry. That is the topic of the day. And in a majority of barbershops. Some barbershops, no, because it depends on who owns the barbershops. But I think we really need to get in those. A lot of people have, I know Captain Dennis Muhammad used to go around and they used to have barbershop talk, where older gentlemen used to come in and really have real conversations in barbershops. We could start doing things like that.
Yeah.
But we also need the direction from the pulpits, right? From the houses of worship to actually have men training classes, because we are not teaching our men to be men, or we are not teaching our men to be husbands. We are not teaching our men to be healthy. And what is that about? A lot of times we learn by trial and error, and the fact that, there are a lot of families that the father is not in the home. So what is the example of the man that this young man has other than social media? And then, God forbid, he's under a toxic mother, right? And then that's a whole nother discussion. How is this young man raised? So I think we need to create safe places for our young Black men and some of our grown men to come and have a place that they could get classes on understanding manhood, get classes on understanding their responsibility, get mental health assistance if they need it. We shouldn't wait till they get to jail, to get mental health.
Especially because they're being put in jail at a very early age, right?
Exactly. Exactly. We need to kind of change the paradigm, because there's more programs in jail for Black men than there is in the community for Black men. And being a correction officer 33 years, I could testify to that. So
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Studies are, it says that 65 or 70% of youth held in American juvenile detention centers actually have a diagnosable mental illness.
yes, we're the only, correction officers is the only law enforcement department that is trained to deal with the mentally ill and supervise the mentally ill. We're the only ones.
Just when you say we're the only ones, who's that now?
Correction officers.
Corrections officers.
Police are not trained to deal with it. Sheriffs are not trained. Probation, parole, correction officers, we are trained. We go through yearly training to deal and supervise the mentally ill. But that's a whole nother story, because under Cuomo, he shut down a lot of the mental hospitals, and that's a whole nother thing, because he shut them all down, and they created an ecosystem that the local prisons and jails were your new mental health facility. That's another reason we see high crime and violence after the bail reform, because these people that needed mental help that was coming to jail, now they're not coming to jail. Now they're staying out on the street. They're not put in jail for 6-7 months. They're staying out on the street. So now you're seeing the repercussions, because a lot of them come to jail. They don't want to be in the homeless shelters because they feel it's unsafe. They think that the jail is more safer than the homeless shelter. But now with the bail reform, because politicians didn't talk to nobody, they just created this bill. Now you're seeing repercussions from the bail reform. They created that ecosystem that the jail would be the new mental health facility.
I think this has been happening for a long time, though. I don't think this is, necessarily specific.
Well,
I mean, I get it. I exactly understand what you're saying.
Exactly.
I think the bail reform, I think, amplified it, where they're being released
back on the street.
We needed bail reform, but I think they went too far, and the bail reform needs to be reformed, because it's people that should not be right back out, and they're not getting help. And I wanted to go back to our young Black boys. I'm working on an article, and I'm working on a documentary, and I use Mount Vernon, the city of Mount Vernon, New York, as a microcosm for the Black community. And what I have noticed is these young men, they were saying, with the shootings and everything, they were saying some of these kids are going through the equivalent of a soldier coming home, the PTSD.
Absolutely.
I said, but the difference is a soldier goes to war and then they come home. These young men live in the war zone. They never leave it. And these incidences happen. There's a drive-by shooting at the school or something, and then there's a big fight or something else happened. And they never get a chance to unpack the situation, and then another traumatic incident happens and they don't unpack it, and then another traumatic incident happens and they don't unpack it, and there are not safe places for them to unpack it, which then leads to dysfunctional grown Black men. You know what I'm saying? Damon, I'd like you to speak about that a little bit.
Well, we have to focus on our community. I mean, just when we was watching the young girl that got stabbed, and the testimony from one of the parents, that 28 years earlier, she witnessed the same thing as a high school. So we're dealing with generational trauma, right? We're seeing this, she saw it 28 years later. Another girl gets stabbed.
She was a freshman in high school when she saw her cousin stabbed to death in high school.
Exactly.
28 years later, her daughter was in a traumatic incident with the young lady, Kayla Green, and there was a major stabbing incident where her best friend died from a stabbing incident, and
in the same high school.
And you can tell from her passion, and when she still 28 years later had not really totally unpacked that situation, and she was reliving it again. She said she could still hear aunt and uncle's screams in her head,
Right.
And that's just an example of, you know,
Right.
when you
And
don't
that's
have
someone
these
that's
services.
admitting it. Exactly.
Right.
That's someone that's admitting it. But how many other families have dealt with that type of trauma, that generational trauma, that every second generation they have to go through a homicide or murder or see some type of a event that's going to affect their children, you know, and we have no safe place to actually unpack it, and then the leaders are not even addressing it, you know. So we continue the cycle, you know, and the question is, when do we break it, right? When do we admit that there is a problem, you know, and when do we lay the foundation on fixing it?
We invite, I just want to say, we did invite some folks to join this conversation, talk about this from the aspect of treatment, and weren't able to get anyone to come on today. And we'll continue to have these types of conversations, and we'll ask you to come back on. I know we're having people ask about, well, you know, what can be done? And I think there are some things that are being done. I know that the two of you on People Before Politics Radio several weeks ago had a panel talking about some interventions that they're doing to educate the local pastors in Westchester County on, and I don't know if it's, I know that you did a course called Mental Health First Aid, which is open to the public. So I want to talk about that, because that will help, you know, it helps people to identify when someone is in crisis. But there are some things like that. I'm going to go ahead and put that link into the chat for folk, but talk about that a little bit. You know, community intervention. What do you think that looks like? What do you think that looks like? Does it look like restorative justice? Does it look like funding health centers? Does it look like having table talks in the community center? Because, so you're talking about community intervention. Say what that looks like.
I think it involves all those aspects, right? Because you have to really reach people where they are, right? So you have to use different aspects to reach the people. And I think and I commend Mount Vernon Police Department, because they have wellness officers now, because of
there's a whole wellness division now.
Right, there's a whole wellness division in the police department.
Shout out to Deputy Commissioner Jennifer Lackard.
But you know, I think it needs to be more flushed out, you know, and because of the lack of police officers and the budget restraints that Mount Vernon has, you know, I don't think it's seen its full potential. But I really think, you know, from that aspect, because, you know, when you have to deal with the social problems, you know, before they become criminal problems, and to have a wellness unit to really go out and deal with these people and deal with the people that needs help. I think that's a great idea too. What they're doing with the pastors is great too, because mental health is far beyond praying to Jesus and think that Jesus is going to change it. Is actually getting the proper help and believing in Christ also, but you got to get the proper help too. So I think educating the pastors to go beyond, and giving the pastors assistance for some mental counseling, you know, for the community, I think that's great too. But, you know, they have to be willing to be out in the street, you know, like Jesus, and go out and get beyond that pulpit.
Some of our Black pastors need some mental health training for them.
Well, absolutely.
Going through some stuff themselves.
Well, yeah, absolutely. But, you know, in that case, they got to come. It's time to come from behind the pulpit, you know, and get in the community, because we've been through a pandemic, and now it looks like we might be going through another one with the monkeypox. So people are going to be very stressed out, and people are going to have a lot of anxiety. So, you know, so we need those proper programs. I don't think it's just one way. I believe we could use a lot of avenues to
tackle this from several issues. We do a Q&A section later, but someone left a comment, and I just want to read that comment. Laura H., she said, "Thank you for this race talk. I've been working in schools and now a pediatric mental health hospital in Washington. I'd love to hear more how correction officers are trained to deal with mentally ill. In our ped psych hospital, we're trying medication and DBT, dialectical behavior therapy. I'd love to learn from Mr. Jones and Mr. Woodson how I may best support our Black youth. This is Laura N, and Laura H, and she's an RN.
Oh, thank you for the question, Laura. They give us yearly training with I guess they call him the head doctor comes in with other psychiatrists, and there's a course that they give, teaching us communication, like IPC skills and
what does that stand for? What is IPC?
What is it? Interpersonal communication.
Okay.
And how to talk and the signs of look when people are depressed, and basically how to respond, because the correction culture for a long time was, all right, you got a problem, you got to deal with it, is jail. Get out of my face, get out of my office. We're not dealing with that. So now we have to be more involved when someone comes to us with any type of with any type of problem, and know what to do after that. So, but it's just like we said, but we're dealing with, at that time when we first got to class, if you was diagnosed having mental illness, right? Either you're in the mental housing area, or there's a couple of blocks that are a step up to regular, but basically, you have to treat the majority of the whole population, because you have to deal with someone walking around there not diagnosed, until something happens, and not everybody goes and they don't screen right away whether to put, unless something comes from the court, unless they have a history of mental illness in the facility, and that when they pull them on the computer, they say, all right, he has to be housed over here, he has to be housed over there. And with the recidivism, sometimes you just know who needs to be where, because they've been there so many times.
Can I ask you a question? And you may not know the answer to this.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that the Black community historically also really does have kind of a stigmatized view of medication. Right. And mental health medication, in particular, perhaps. And when you're, can people be medicated when they're incarcerated? But I imagine, are they being medicated against their will? What is the use of medication? Because many times, if people are medicated properly, they will be able to thrive, right? But it's necessary to have a diagnosis and a treatment, and sometimes that treatment rightly is medication. So,
right.
And I know that this is a flawed system. I'm asking just what is your viewpoint on that?
Okay, I'm gonna start with a story before I get to that. I don't know if anybody remember the subway shooter.
The recent one?
Yes,
Which one?
Which one, right? The one that had the one that had the YouTube videos up.
Yeah, and it's not funny, but
Right. The one that had the YouTube videos up about how he needed help, right? And that he was really going after Mayor Eric Adams, but
okay.
I mean, it was basically the system itself was not giving people help that had mental issues. And one of the videos, he said that what I'm about to do, nobody's gonna talk about what I'm saying here, they're gonna talk about what I did, right? So this young man, I believe, he needed help. He needed his medication, he needed being properly taken care of, and he knew he could get that in jail. Now, when they come to jail, they get better. Why? Because they're on a schedule. They get 3 hots in the cot. They're protected. they're taken care of. I haven't seen anyone that has refused their medication, that understand that they have a mental health issue in my 33 years there. And if those are if ones do refuse the type of medication, a lot of times they're very violent and they're housed in a special area. But normally people will come to jail and get medication that they haven't taken for months or years because they just didn't have the money to do it, or they didn't have the health care or the insurance.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you. So we're gonna open for Q&A. AJ, I think you have another question as well. Let me just tell people if they have a question, how to raise their hand, okay?
Yes.
So go to the bottom of your screen and go to the reaction button, hit that, and there will be also an icon for you to raise your hand, or you can find your name in the participants list and raise your hand that way. When you ask your question, we are gonna ask you to come on camera, please. AJ, go ahead and ask your question, and then we'll go to Q&A, and then I have a question as well.
So for well, everyone, we're going to talk about it later. You do have a book that says Black Minds Must Matter. And I thought that the importance of having this conversation is because, again, like I said, we're missing from the conversation Black men and boys, and you can't have a healthy community without Black men, healthy Black men. You can't have a healthy Black community, and we're not addressing the issue. As Black men, like you said, we're told to stand strong, never let them see you sweat, whatever.
Right.
You know what I mean? We're supposed to hold it in. We're supposed to be strong for our families and for everybody else. But who do we go to when how do we unpack what we're going through? And like you said, that one young lady, she looked at her husband as weak. And I think words, she called him a chump because he wanted to get some therapy, and she thought he was a sucker. That was the word she used, actually.
Right.
And that's your wife. You understand what I'm saying? So that's some of that's why we don't do it, and that stigma. Anything I haven't asked you that you want to bring to about this conversation that is very important for us to know?
No, I think you asked a lot of great questions. I think it was a lot of great questions.
I'm sorry, I thought you were done. Go ahead, Damon.
Go ahead.
I do want to add one point too. You mentioned this earlier in our diet. Your first book was about eating healthy. And I know your story, so I'm going to say it and I'm going to let you speak on it. You were taking care of your mom. Both our moms have passed. You were taking care of your mom, and you realized you were on the same medication as your mother.
Right.
And you went to the doctor and told the doctor, and the doctor said it's hereditary.
Right.
The problem is the doctor did not know that you were adopted.
Right.
So it cannot be hereditary. The one thing that y'all had in common was your diet.
Exactly.
That's what got you on this path.
Exactly.
And learning how, about the different foods and stuff. So I just want to talk about the important, because you mentioned food deserts and stuff, our diet as far as our mental health, speak about that.
Well, your diet, there was just a study that just brought up on CNN about processed foods and hypertension. Your diet plays a role in your mental health because of the fact that the blood that goes to your brain, right? It affects how you think. If you look at many studies on how people that actually begin to eat clean and get off of processed foods and let go of red meat for a while, their thinking is clear. There's also in my personal life, even being more spiritual, because I'm not clouding my blood, and I'm not clouding my body. I'm putting energy in my body. So there's difference, and the studies have shown, that food, if you change your diet, it will also help you with fighting anxiety and depression.
And the last thing I wanted to mention,
Proper exercise too. With proper.
the last thing we didn't talk about that comes with Black mental health, suicide in the Black community.
Right.
If you would speak to that.
I said that, earlier that we don't talk about the rise in Black male suicide, and Black Caribbean men are the most. They kill themselves the most out of all Black males in America. But, even researchers have been trying to sound that alarm on the high rate of suicide among Black men. And that has not been talked about. If we're going to talk about, Black Lives Matter, we have to add in health, wellness, and mental clarity with that, because, more people are dying and there's increasing numbers of people are dying from suicide, increasing numbers of people are dying from bad health than killings of racist white cops. I'm just, we can march for that, but we're not marching for the health and wellness, the overall health and wellness and mental clarity of Black men. I would love to see marches about that, along with marches about police brutality.
And we're seeing that more with our children. And the suicide and all of that,
Yes.
the numbers are rising with Black children.
I actually have a link I'd like to put in the chat to a study. The Action Alliance put out a study called "Ring the Alarm: The Crisis of Black Youth Suicide in America."
Yes.
Really interesting, very important information. Please do read that. And I'd like to ask Mike Johnson to go ahead and ask his question. He put his hand down. It's okay, Mike, if you can't activate your camera, it's fine. You can still ask your question. Do you still have a question?
I do actually.
Oh, there you are.
Couple things. Thank you. This has been a great conversation. First of all, Mr. Jones, thank you, because I know corrections officers, extremely challenging, difficult job. So appreciate your service. Just a couple things. So I'm in New York City, and I have seen. I guess there was a call at a residence, and they are. I mean, I don't know if they're doing it, but I saw it where they had a mental health professional actually on the call itself.
Good.
Police officers were there, and you could hear whoever was in there. I couldn't see, but they were. I don't know if they had something up, a chair up, or so they were negotiating with the person, and
Good.
it did end. So they are doing that. In terms of the fear of being pulled over, I'll be honest, last month I was upstate with my family. My older son, we're looking at schools in New York State, and I got pulled over. I guess when a police officer has someone pulled over, you're supposed to give a full length on the highway, which
Right.
I don't own a vehicle, but now I'm obviously aware of that law, and I thought I gave enough space, but I didn't. He pulled me over. It went whatever, but my son pointed out saying, "Dad, I saw your hand was shaking. You were nervous
Right.
when you were handing him the information." So again, for me, I mean, I don't think all police officers start their day thinking, "Wow, I wonder how I could really mess up someone's life." For me, I don't, I sort of comply with law enforcement. So I don't know if that's just something, maybe PSAs of, if you will have you can plead not guilty, and you will, whatever, just don't, go through the process. So I don't know if that's there. You had mentioned, there's some situations on these calls. I mean, the thing in the terms of like, how much do you give? Because it's New York City. If there's someone unstable on a train, do we shut down the whole subway line and negotiate for 10 hours? I mean, how do you, things have to sort of keep going in the sense of, does everything close down? A street closes down for 20 hours to negotiate?
So
And
Mike,
then my
you're
last
talking
thing-
about, police action policy now, right?
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
Questions around?
Yeah, because easily, you don't want to have anybody be harmed, but they could, it could take many resources and things. And I guess the last thing I have is sort of the irony in all this, the defund the police or reducing the prison population, because you mentioned there's some people that they sort of want the system of, getting their meals and getting medicine. There's this irony of, well, if we don't discipline the young, this is what happens. I mean, I think society has to realize, if you do break the law, there are consequences.
Thank you for that, Mike.
So I know I threw a lot of things out here, but
Thank you. And I want to remind everybody that this is a conversation about Black male mental health and not necessarily about policing. And Damon, go ahead if you have an answer to that. I just wanted to put us.
So I think it depends on the police management, how long it will take. A life is a life, right? And if you're dealing with someone that is mentally ill, I think it will take as long as it will take to stop the threat, or put this person in custody. Yes, a lot of stops are no problem, but there's a lot of things as Black men and Black people that don't go well when being pulled over. My wife is a detective in Mount Vernon, and we got pulled over by a state trooper, and I had to call a supervisor on him because he was very disrespectful, and she was in uniform. So sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes it works, sometimes it don't. But as Black people, we are taught how to survive police confrontations, right? We're not taught just pulling over, because
You gotta have to talk with your child.
it's a lot. We have to have that talk, because it's a reality in Black neighborhoods. As far as disciplining youth, I think we still have the school to prison pipeline. I think our elected officials are making it worse, because when you could have Westchester County Jail can have inmates with high-speed internet, PlayStation, and iPads, but the kids in Mount Vernon don't have textbooks. I think there's a problem. So we are still feeding the school to prison pipeline, because we are investing in jails and not investing in schools, in our public schools, like we need to. So it's much more than discipline. It's about resources, right? It's about generational wealth. So when we get to talking about that, it's about resources. It's about how Use Westchester is constructed so that the poor people are put in certain cities and deliberately. There's a report called the African American Advisory Board in 1992 to Andrew O'Rourke, the then county exec. Everything that they predicted in that report has went on when it comes to racism and segregation, and where they decided to put their poor people, and how they duped Black families out of 119 to sell all their homes to build the strip mall. All that's in the report.
119 is Greenberg?
Yeah, in Greenberg, New York.
Route 119. So
Route 119.
There's people outside of Mount Vernon, out of
Right.
Westchester that don't know.
And they're still continuing to do it, closing down housings and purposely directing people to Mount Vernon and other cities. So we're still creating those situations.
And continuing to resist building affordable housing.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
In places where
Like
people
Greenberg, right.
can thrive. And so I just want to, because we have people, as you said, AJ, outside of Westchester, I just wanted to, encourage people to look at the history of your neighborhoods, and look at the history of your cities, look at where people are located, and look back at archives and see how those populations have been allocated, reallocated. Where's the funding going? Where do the big box stores go? Where is the treatment, the water treatment plant? How are these things dispersed? Because you will see that absolutely the poor health of African Americans, Black and Brown communities is absolutely predictable and tied to decisions that have continued to be made by government in this country for, I'll just say decades, but really it's centuries. So You know, we want to be mindful here that this is not a new issue, but it's never too late to address these issues. We need to look at this. AJ said earlier, well, without healthy Black males, we don't have healthy Black communities. Well, we don't have healthy communities. We don't have a healthy society without healthy Black males, because Black males are a part of the larger society. We are all here together, right? So what affects one affects the other. So just thanks for being a part of this conversation today. AJ, thank you for letting me interrupt. I know you want to get to the queue. I think it's Carol, Tanya, and Kyle.
And I wanted to just, for our next, everybody asking a question, so we can get everybody in, if you can make your question as brief and to the point as possible, so we can get to the next, as many questions as possible. We have Carol first. You have to unmute yourself. There you go,
Yep.
Carol.
Thank you. Back to the mental health questions. First, I am the parent of Black men. So in my neighborhood, we've also had the talk, but this one young Black man I know has a chemical dependency problem, but he decided that he has had some trauma, especially recently over his life. And he MHA'd himself to a local hospital and said, I need to be an inpatient. I need to take care of my mental health before I can do this. And they evaluated him and said, maybe. And then they evaluated him, and a couple days later, all the time keeping him in the general psych emergency room, big holding area. Then they were like, man, maybe we ought to admit you. And then after 5 days in the psych holding area, they said, oh, well, you're homeless. So must be you're just looking for food and shelter. So we can't think of any reason to keep you here. And they put him back out on the street. And if you're willing to talk about your mental health and you're smart enough to know that's what you need, it would be nice if someone listened to people.
Right. And you know, and unfortunate, sometimes it's just about money. He's homeless, he doesn't have insurance, and they let him go. It's unfortunate. It really is. But, you know, I mean, that's our system. You know, and how do we change it? We have to really push on these politicians to change the system. You know, look what they just did. You know, the outrage caused the Senate to actually pass the bill for the veterans. It didn't pass. You know, I mean, this is the system we live in. You know, we have to create these conversations and change them, because if he came in and he needed help, and I guess they took those 5 days to find out how they were going to get paid, you know, and they found out he was homeless, you know, but then what, a lot of times the homeless people, what they do, they take a rock, break a window, and they go to jail and they get the help they need. And that's unfortunate.
And of course, we're not advocating, I mean, we would never
Right.
advocate that that's a solution, right? The Department of Corrections is not a mental health facility.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Right? It is not a housing facility. It is not an education facility. It is not, you know, Department of Corrections that's not what it's meant for. And putting the funding over there, right, and having it be a resource that way is confusing the entire issue.
Right.
Absolutely. And I just want to say, that's what I want to say. We need more funding outside. And I heard someone mention defund the police. Defund the police before it was co-opted for another message. It wasn't that we don't need police officers, that group of people saying we don't need police officers or pay them less. It was like every year we throw more money at the police departments, and every situation, as we said earlier, every call doesn't need a badge and a gun. Sometimes you need a mental health facility. But because the community has been, services have been ripped out of the community, the only 24-hour agency to respond now is the police department, which is not fair to the police department. And I've talked to many police officers, they're not trained or equipped for that. And that, again, is our elected officials and where we put our money. So we need money pushed to these services and these and treatment.
I wanted to address, Stephanie said, please let us not glorify the possible mindfulness of the DOC regards to addressing mental health of Black men.
And I just asked you to be brief on that so we can get to the questions too.
Yeah, I'm just real quick. I think it's the tactics. See, we fall for the banana in the tailpipe all the time, because nobody questions the politicians when they said, we got all these programs in jail. We got all these programs. But nobody says, well, what programs do you have out in the community? Nobody questions. See, we got to the point now where everything, we're not glorifying it. This is what they're doing, right? This is the funds that the politicians vote on, and they put it in there. But nobody's questioning them, why are you putting it in there and you're not putting it in safe places? Why should I have to wait to get locked up to be able to get a free culinary class? That's
right. We have no trades. Yeah, that's
exactly. Or learn a trade. No, but we have to be able to question the politicians, because they're the ones that's controlling those budgets. They're putting the budgets in jail, but not the budgets in our educational system and in our local community centers. So that we can have the resources there. We're not glorifying it. We're pointing out the fact that we got to move the funds around. We got to make the priority the community, not the jails. And right now, they're making the priorities the jails, not the community.
And let me also say that remind people that many of these jails are privately funded,
yes.
Right? And so private funding will get more funding. I mean, that's just kind of the way that is.
Exactly.
And it really, we really do need to highlight the damage that is being done. I want to go ahead and get to our questions with Tanya and Kyle, but I want to at some point come back and talk about the importance of doing some programming inside these schools to get these children before they get remanded.
I think it was Kyle first and then Tanya. Kyle.
I have two questions for you, and I'm trying to decide which one. I think I'll go with, and yes, that was me making the way to ask for a second one when I'm done. In my experience of being in prison and talking to people who've been to prison, interviewing them on Amplified Silence on my YouTube channel, I often hear prison, and particularly solitary confinement, but prison in general is a place where mental health needs are not well addressed, and where those in authority, officers in the tend to not be skilled or sensitive to the wide variety of special needs that the people, incarcerated individuals have. So my question to you is this: the training that you get that allows you to offer people mental health services, what does that training equip you to do better in your job?
Can I say one thing? And I want to add to that question. Damon is in the Westchester County Department of Corrections.
Exactly.
I don't is all correction get the same training, or
that's what I was
speaking about what Westchester gets.
That's great. Yeah.
Great distinction. I'm not speaking for your particular
right.
If you can speak on behalf of maybe what you hear of other prisons getting in where they can improve.
Well, it all depends. It all depends on who the directive of the facility. Right now, Westchester County, New York Jail, we are a nationally accredited facility. Now, all facilities are nationally accredited. So you have to meet accreditation on not local. You have local accreditation, then you have national accreditation. So on a national accreditation level, you have to meet another step of criteria to be national accredited. I think I don't know where you live, sir, but I know in New York they have been a big push, you know, into being more humane in correctional facilities, in which, depending on the facility, you know, and depending on who's the politician, you know, what direction they would take the facility in. At the jail that I work at, they have taken the more humane route and taking the route to address the mental ill needs of the inmates. So not every facility does what we do, you know. Not every,
So for you
you know,
personally,
and a lot of that comes down to resources, you know, and management, and which way they want to take the facility.
but what do they teach you though?
Well, you know, I mean, basically dealing with mentally ill, how to supervise them, how to talk to them, how to respond, not to set off, to diffuse a lot of the situations, you know, that we deal with, and now to the point that they're taking more away from the officer, they put it more on the supervisors. Before we are able to even lock an inmate in, you know, when I started, it was like lock in, no, and it went to straight physical to put them in the cell, and that was 33 years ago. Now, you know, they say lock in, we have to call the sergeant. The sergeant has to come and try to diffuse the situation. If the sergeant don't do it, you got to call the captain, right? The captain has to come try to diffuse the situation. And before they call the team, which is the guys that's with the helmets and the shield and all that, they have to call the nurse, and the nurse have to come and evaluate the person. So all these things go down for one situation now, you know, in our facility. So that's the level that they're taking before anything gets physical. And by the time it gets past the nurse, and then they have to call the team in, the guy walks into the cell. So we have to deal with that with every inmate. We have to do that process, you know, in dealing with that. And then they have to come, and then after that, they come and they evaluate the person, and then they tell them if the person, you know, if they feel that the person needs more mental health evaluation, or the person is okay. So it's a lot of steps beyond the officer. It goes beyond the officer at this point, you know, because before, as I said, if you say no, it goes to the physical and throwing the person in the cell. But those correction days are over. So now
Thank you, Damon. Thank you, Damon. And thank you, Kyle. I'm just gonna interrupt you, and I'm gonna bring us back, ask us to come back, please, be about 15 minutes. And it is good that there are some systems that are being more progressive around mental health, and correction officers are still not mental health practitioners, right?
Right.
So it's, yeah. And so Black male mental health can't be all about what they're getting in prison or what they're not getting in prison, right? Black male mental health needs to be how to keep them out of prison and not have them go there in the first place, right? Which has a lot to do with, you know, managing systemic racism, you know, managing, you know, appropriate education, of managing the situation around childhood stress, you know, the adverse childhood experiences, right? There are actually, and managing, I mean, yeah, we can talk about managing the privatization of the prisons, right? All of these things are interconnected, right?
Absolutely.
And I'm going to ask that in the next 15 minutes, we focus on Black male mental health. What is the issue and how might we address it? And I know that this is a very limited conversation in terms of everything that needs to go into this pot, right, to create a solution, right? So, and I thank you, Kyle, for your question, because it's valid and I got it. And it's important because most, I would say, in the United States prison systems are not progressive, right? Still.
Absolutely.
And thank you, Damon, for being a corrections officer who's doing walking on a different path.
Mhm.
So Tanya, my friend, do you have a question about Black male mental health or a comment?
I have a comment, and there's an article from a while ago in the New York Times, I believe, which I encourage people to look up, and it's about how there is 15% deficit of male to female in the Black community compared to, so if you look at white people, there's even numbers of men and women in the general free community. Among Black people, there is 85 men versus 100 women in the free community. I think this speaks to the mental health issue for Black men. You got 15% less Black men trying to hold up the community. And I apologize, Mr. Woodson and Mr. Jones, I was late to, I don't know if you addressed this at the beginning, but I did hear you say, the idea that the man has to be strong, has to keep to himself his sadness and grief, because he doesn't want the rest of the family who are in sadness and grief or whatever to see it, and also having to hold up more of the community with fewer people. So I'd love to hear what you have to say regarding that, if anything. Thank you.
Damon?
I think we have to. That's another issue. The Black family structure is another issue that causes anxiety and stress. The Black children living in two-parent households is the lowest of all ethnic groups. I think it's around 35%, which is an issue. Young Black boys not having a Black male as a prime example of what Black masculinity is. Healthy Black
Healthy Black male.
Yeah, I gotta make sure I put that in front of it. So we have to create those spaces. I look at myself all the time. A lot of times, as an example, my father passed when I was 3, so I was raised by my mother. But my mother made a point to, and back then we had programs, Dad's Club, and I was in every Dad's Club sport, and back then the police officers were the coaches, so we had a different dynamic than we do now. And so, we have to get back to those days where a lot of things that they just cut out because they don't want to fund. They don't want to fund these programs where we could have young Black men around other Black men, and I think it also takes a responsibility of Black men to want to be want to be examples to younger Black men. I mean, we push forth a lot of different programs in Mount Vernon to mentor young Black men. Before AJ, the Westchester Black Correctional Organization, we had a program where we went into the elementary schools, and we wanted all the bad kids. We didn't want any good kids. We want all the bad kids because those are the kids that didn't seem to get the attention, and we made a difference in them young men just having lunch with them in the library three days a week, just having lunch. And one of the kids got in trouble one day, and they said he couldn't have lunch. He literally got on the phone and called his mother because he wanted to be in the group. But that's being around Black men and them not having that type of, or not seeing those type of positive Black men. So we really have to start being examples of healthy Black men. Black men have to take responsibility too. We have to take responsibility for our young children so we can try to be examples of them to be healthy men in their community.
I'm going to ask you a question about that after Adine, and I think it might be one of our last questions, but I also want to push back at you a little bit. because I know that part of, that labeling is an issue. And so we have to be careful not to label our kids good and bad, because,
Well,
kids
by
are
their
kids.
record, we wanted.
I know exactly. I know exactly what you mean. So I say it with love, right?
We wasn't labeling. We went.
I know.
Go
I
through
say
the
it with
record.
love, but I know exactly what you mean. But we have to be careful not to perpetuate that. Dean, what's your question, please? And you're going to be the last question, I think.
Damon, I think what you really were referring to is damaged children, wounded children.
Yes.
And when the children are wounded and damaged, they become the bad kid. This is a really interesting discussion, but it has very deep historical roots. When we were brought to this country, it was never intended that we would be treated well.
Right.
It was never intended that our needs would be met.
Right.
And the system we have today is based on the system of the old system that brought us here in the first place.
That's right.
So it's almost naive to look to your enemy to free you,
That's
because
right.
your enemy is not interested in freeing you.
That's right.
The people who run this country want to see us second and third class citizens, want to see us fighting among ourselves,
That's right.
want to see us weak, and want to see us fill up the jail so that they have more jobs. So I think we need to adopt a stronger survival or survivor attitude where we have to rely on ourselves within a system that will always be hostile to us.
That's right. That's right.
Because your enemy is not going to free you.
That's right.
It's not to his advantage.
That's
His
right.
or her advantage.
You're absolutely right. I couldn't say that any better myself. You are absolutely right.
We
So
have any more? Okay, go ahead. Wayne.
No, it's all right. There was somebody in the chat who actually wanted to hear more about the systemic disadvantage and how that causes health disparities. So, but I see that Leah also has a question. So, go ahead, Leah.
Sorry, Adine inspired me.
No, you're fine.
Adine, I think you're absolutely correct. And I say amen to you all the time. But I think I'm feeling like if we get enough white people to understand what's going on, the people in power, we can change the systems to be more equitable and not affect Black men in such a horrible, oppressive way. And I think, that's what partially what Race Talk is about, spreading this sentiment and word and understanding about what's going on. Thank you so much, Damon. I think I've seen you on the Westchester Coalition for Police Reform. I love your presence. You're so calming and a beautiful person. I just wanted to say that I totally agree with Adine about the historical oppression of Black people and men in particular, who have been emasculated for hundreds of years and still struggle to this day to, support their families and just be part of the society and a respected part of the society. And I just have to say that if white women were being killed by police all the time, I would get a gun. And I probably sound crazy right now, but I can totally understand Black men, and I would get a gun and shoot a cop too. So, I probably have a little too much testosterone, but that's just me. But thank you so much. And
Thank you.
I want to say one thing before David speaks. So common. Damon's my partner with Black Westchester. People always tell me, "Oh, Damon's such a common spirit, and Damon's such a patient." Let me just say, until he's not, don't let the smooth day fool you. This is also, but I want to say this is a healthier Damon as well, and a more mature Damon. You know what I'm saying? That's all. This, which is very important because we all had a little toxicity in us, and this is the more healthier Damon. So I just want to add that. So
You also inspired me to maybe cut back on the sugar because maybe that'll calm me down a little bit. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. No, I thank you. I think, I think, white people have a role in correcting it, and I think Black people have a role also. We just can't put it all on white people. It's a process for Black men, healthy Black men. We have to start pushing back on toxic Black male masculinity and on the toxic Black culture. Because Black culture has changed. Even the rap music has changed. From giving a message of the condition of Black people, on glorifying criminals and gangsters, and to the point that you don't know the rapper is the drug dealer, or the drug dealer is the rapper. So we have to begin to push back as Black people. We have to begin to push back on that also, and as well as work alongside white people that understand, that wants to change the system, to push back it also, because we have to be at we both have different mentions, but we also being a united voice for change.
absolutely. We had one comment. I shared the live video on my page on Facebook, and one of the viewers that's watching on Facebook, Carla, I know this is a whole other conversation, but I just wanted to mention it though. Probably don't have time to address it. She said one of the other situations is, don't forget about the aging out of the foster care system. That also plays a part in all of this. There's nothing for them after they age out, and she wanted me to bring that up.
So, yeah. So what is that's a whole different.
When you only in foster care to a certain age. So once you age out, and there's no trades and there's no services.
Oh, it's 18?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So then there's nothing for, like, so she was saying that's also part of the problem.
Yeah.
As we were mentioning things, don't forget to mention that. That's all.
Yeah. I just think we just need to, folks, look at the systems, and look at the systems in the community. And I've always said, like, you will house, a young man in jail. It's cheaper to send them to Westchester Community College than to house them in jail for a year. So we have to start looking at the systems and where the finances is going. And we need to start funding more programs. And Black people need to stop being fooled for Black faces and places, that don't do anything. And a lot of white people say, "Yay, we got a Black," they promoted a Black guy, but he's not doing a damn thing. he's not doing anything. So
sometimes he's a puppet. He's just there.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, we have to stop falling for that. What are they going to do to advance, Black people? Why are politicians, Black, white, yellow, brown, afraid to talk about a Black agenda? Black mental health should be part of a Black agenda, but nobody wants to talk about that. And our politicians will give us symbolism with it, but there's no substance. And because we don't communicate as the Black and white people for change, we don't communicate. So white people will think, look, Black people are getting something, but we actually got nothing, from an appointment, and sometimes, there's some Black people, we rather have a white person there because they're not going to do anything and they're going to be harder on the rank and file Black people than the white person. I mean, so we have to have more communication, and and speak on truth. And we all could agree on truth. I think we can move forward for change.
This is usually the part of the show, and I want to wrap so we keep it in a certain time frame, where we ask you to share your website and your social media and how people can get in touch with you. And before that, I want to also add the comment, because we usually say what can the audience do to get involved more and help the situation. And one is stay on our elected officials. Like, our elected officials make they fund these programs, they pass the things that fund these programs. We have to fight and demand that our elected officials fund these programs that we need. And then we have to stay on them, because they need our vote to be in office. So we have to understand that our power and do that collectively. Damon, would you like to share your website? Your book's available on Amazon, any social media, how people can follow you? Support what you're doing.
All social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, it's all Damon K. Jones. I have a website, damonkjones.com. All 5 of my books are sold on Amazon. And you can also get me through Black Westchester, blackwestchester.com. And that's the way you could talk to me. And I agree with AJ again. We have to stay on our elected officials. If they could invest, locally, $30 million to rebuild Memorial Field, they could invest $2 or $3 million to get young kids books in Mount Vernon High School. So, I mean, these are the things we have to start talking about, and invest in our children, and their schooling, their after-school programs. All that plays a role in a child's mental capacity. He comes out and he smells urine and all that, but he goes to White Plains and it's nice and clean. All that plays a role in his self-esteem. Why do I live like this, but I could go to White Plains and it's nice and clean? So we have to really be able to address that.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Damon K. Jones, author, Black Minds Must Matter. Please check out his books on Amazon. Thank you to my co-host, AJ Woodson, Black Westchester Magazine. And you can find both of these gentlemen by tuning into the People Before Politics radio hour at 6 p.m. on Sundays. And you can get them through their Black Westchester Facebook page. Yes. At 6 p.m.
Yes.
Just put that in the chat for me, please. I have to close this out. I wanted to say there's a couple of things. So Leah, I love you and thank you. And all Black men who are harassed by police are not buying guns and shooting them. So just wanted to say that. Words matter. I also wanted to thank my audience and everybody. Thank you. This is our last program before September. We're going to take off in the month of August. We encourage you to continue to increase your understanding of race and racism in the United States, recognizing that racism dehumanizes us all. Please do continue to connect with people who don't look or live like you. Continue to read and listen to podcasts and take courses. I also wanted to emphasize before we close out, we cannot continue to, yes, we do need to push on our legislators, but we cannot wait on government to make the differences, to be the change that we need to see. We need to become advocates for ourselves and the people that we care about. We can start our own groups. We can continue to support. We can join restorative justice circles. There are things that we can do and changes that you can make and groups that you can join. Please do that. Black minds must matter. Indeed, we all are in this together. If you are on my mailing list, please make sure to check out our learning and development resources that we send out each week. And you can ask questions, you can get more involved, you can make a donation at racetalkrevolution.com, and you can connect with us and make a suggestion for a talk, a topic, or a speaker at info@racetalkrevolution.com. Have a great August, everybody. Damon K. Jones, thank you. AJ Woodson, thank you. AJ, do you want to say something that takes 30 seconds?
Yes, y'all had me on and y'all learned about me. Now you see the other half of Black Westchester, and it's the two of us. That's why we came and put this together, to have these conversations. So a lot of this you can see on blackwestchester.com. And don't forget to buy my book. It's available on Amazon. Black Westchester, The Origin Story, and How My Faith Was Instrumental in This Great Experiment, and explains a lot of how we got started and some of the trials and tribulations we went through.
All right. Thank you all. You've been very, very generous. Thank you to our donors. Thank you so much for this conversation this afternoon, everybody. Take care. Damon, thanks so much again.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care.